What up, Raffalitos? Welcome back to my channel. We are back at Ogle. This is the Ogle Airport Road, the entrance to the new East Coast Bypass Road. Behind me, that is the East Coast Road. Now, that is the road that China helped build, the one behind me. So recently there was a visit by the US Secretary of State, Mr. Marco Rubio, and the government of Guyana decided to welcome him at Timeri by taking him on a drive through along the new roads that were built, the new Heroes Highway. And on returning or leaving Guyana, Mr. Rubio declared that Heroes Highway is the concussion road. Now, there are a number of misstatements in his assessment, one of which is that the Heroes Highway was built by the Chinese. The Heroes Highway was built by Guyanese contractors and not Chinese contractors, because, as I've said in several videos in the past, the Chinese contractors actually build better infrastructure than Guyanese. However, this road, the one behind me, this one, the East Coast Road, this one was built by the Chinese. And if you go along East Coast Road, particularly as you go past, say, Good for Wacton and Atlanticville and so on, further up the East Coast, you'll find that it is in fact a very, very good road and nothing like the Heroes Highway. The one I'm on right now is being built by the Indians. So this is the Indian government and Indian contractors that are building this road, which is the East Coast Bypass Road. And the difference you can see between this road, the East Coast Bypass Road, and Heroes Highway is that Heroes Highway was built with concrete. So the entire surface of Heroes Highway is poured concrete, whereas these roads that were built by the Chinese and the Indians are covered with asphalt. And asphalt allows you to make a smoother road, whereas the concrete roads tend to have undulations and dips, and it's very, very rough. And what Marco Rubio was reporting on is how it felt to drive along Heroes Highway. And what I'm going to do is bring you an update as I describe for you the difference between Guyanese contracting, Guyanese engineering, and what they've built here. The Indians have built here and the Chinese have built on the East Coast. So let's take a look at the differences. So guys, like I said, Heroes Highway was built by Guyanese contractors. But this road, this East Coast Road, the one I'm looking at right now, this one was built by Chinese contractors. And if you go further up, you will see what that means. The roads have turning lanes. That is the roads that are built by the Chinese. They have turning lanes. And similarly, the road here, this one was built by the Indian contractors on a loan from the Indian government. So a lot of these the workers on this road were actually Indian nationals. And as you can see, there's a turning lane here as the road reaches the intersection with the East Coast. All right, so traffic that wants to turn right can pull over to the median and wait for the light change and then turn onto that major road. Across the street, that is Pradoville. As you see, the sign says Ogle. And Pradoville is one of those neighborhoods that the current government developed for friends and family of the ruling party, PPP. But back to this road, what we're doing today is taking a look at the progress, because some people have asked me to do a further review of what's happening here on the East Coast Bypass Road. They want to know if it's been completed. Well, in fact, it has not been completed. What they have done since the last time we've been here is they've covered the east and left and west sides of this road with asphalt. So now both sides of the road that is at the entrance are covered with asphalt, and they seem to have made some progress. They seem to have made some progress with the median, working on the median. This building is, of course, another rental apartment complex. It's called Ogle Townhouses. That seems to be closer to completion. They have what seems to be parking. That was a very narrow parking line. It's probably parking for motorcycles. I thought this might be parking on the outside. Anyway, it looks as if they've completed the outside of these townhouses. But yes, guys, what I'm saying about the construction of this road is that the Indians and the Chinese have covered their roads, the roads that they've built, with asphalt. And the thing about asphalt is that you can make for a smoother road because it's kind of like a fluid, right? This material, this asphalt, when you lay it on the road surface, it's kind of soft, and then you can roll it and eventually achieve a smooth surface. The problem with concrete is you can't roll it. You can't roll concrete after you've laid it, after it's hardened. You cannot roll it into a smooth surface. And that's the problem with Heroes Highway. The road was built with concrete, but they never finished it with covering the surface with asphalt. And so what you have is an undulating surface, a rough surface. Now, people might argue that the roughness is useful because it, adds to traction. But what is not useful is the dips and the bumps. And there are so many of them that if your car doesn't have a very good suspension system, you could actually feel it in the seats. And this is in fact what Mr. Rubio is describing as a concussion. You could have a concussion driving down those roads. If you're in a car without very good suspension, you could be bouncing around and probably hit your head against the ceiling and be tossed around because the road surface is undulating, it's bumpy, it's rough. And that's because you cannot roll concrete. You can't roll concrete surfaces to make them smooth. So what they have to do next is to cover that East Coast Bypass Road, which is now called Heroes Highway. They have to cover that road with asphalt. Now remember when I started driving in Brooklyn, right? When I started, it's like in the 90s. I don't know if the situation still exists, but I discovered that the Belt Parkway was actually made with slabs of concrete. And those of you who are familiar with driving on the belt, you would remember or recall, I don't know if it still happens now, that as you drive along, you would hear the wheels, the tires, making a rhythmic sound. Now, cup, 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 as you cross over the seams, the joints. And parts of that Belt Parkway, they cover that concrete slabs with asphalt, and then you would hear a smoother ride. So it's not that you can't build roads with concrete. It's that if you want to have it smooth, then you have to cover the concrete after it's built. After it's set, you have to cover it with asphalt. Now this is as far as the East Coast Bypass Road has been completed at this point. So it is not yet completed. There are sections of this road that are still under construction. This part is before you get to the train line road, right, the railway road. So half of the Ogle Airport section of East Coast Bypass Road is still under construction. still to be completed. And that's what this represents. Now this road, like I said, is being built by the Indians. And as you can see, they have laid about 6 inches of asphalt onto the surface of the rocks that they've laid down below. That was never done with Heroes Highway. So in a sense, Heroes Highway is not yet completed. The road has not yet reached its final stage. Last time we were here, they had just completed this culvert. So this is actually a culvert, and now they're going to build, I think they're building the walls on either side of this bridge. But as you can see, the eastern side, the eastern half of this road is not yet completed. But the western side is open to traffic, and that's traffic heading into and out of Ogle Airport. This is looking back towards the intersection with the East Coast Road. This is the East Coast Bypass Road. So they had to fill in a canal. They had to fill in a wide canal to get this width. And that's what we're looking at. All the piles of sand was actually brought here to fill the canal. And I guess now they're gonna level it off and build the road surface. So this road is not yet complete. Some people were asking me to visit this road. Now this is the East Coast end. The other end of this road is at Eccles. And I once made a trip all the way from Eccles, from the Eccles end to the East Coast end. It's about 7 miles. 7 miles. In fact, I don't know if I'm going to make that trip today. I will probably just do a little bit of it today and then come back at the other end, at the Eccles end, and make the other trip. This is the railway road. It's also being widened, so you can see this is eventually going to become a 4-lane highway. We've seen they've started working on that back up at Sheriff Street, which you've seen in the previous video. But this is what it looks like at this end. This is what the East Coast Bypass Road looks like at this end. It has not yet been completed, and they're still working on building out the west or the east half of the road, but they've actually completed the west half and have opened it to traffic. It's not a plane from Ogle. It's Saturday morning in Georgetown, Saturday the 29th of March, and it's a busy morning for Ogle Airport. And here now, the guy is constructing this East Coast Bypass Road. So where are we with the construction of the East Coast Bypass Road? They're still working on it. It seems as if this section is still to be formed. Last time we were here, there were still piles of sand. What is clear now is that they're actually building a concrete canal. Right, so basically, these guys are putting in the cast, the steel work for, morning guys. These guys are putting in the cast work for no YouTube. These guys are putting in the cast ironwork for a concrete canal. This one is, at least is wider than what is being built elsewhere. So these guys are actually putting in a pretty wide canal. Concrete canal with retaining walls, pretty high retaining walls. So you can get an idea of what this final project will look like. It's going to have some fairly wide canals, which is a relief because a lot of the canals that are being filled in with these narrow drains are using up the capacity for reserve water when it rains. And this is going to be tested in the rainy season. We get rainy season about 4 times a year. Well, two dries and 2 wet seasons, 2 rainy seasons a year. And sometimes it's so wet that you get floods. And eventually these drains that are being built are going to be tested. So the good thing about this drain is that it is wide. It is replacing what is in fact a wide canal. And people have been concerned that a lot of these wide canals are being filled in or being replaced by narrow drains. At least for the first time I can say this is an appropriately sized canal. But this is what is happening here on the East Coast Bypass Road. What they have done, so I see they started adding the street lights, right? So you can see the fixtures for the street lights have been added to this section. Just a few of them, maybe 6 of them or so. But this is what it looks like now on 29th day of March 2025. The East Coast Bypass Road. Yes, I think the Eccles end is more complete than this current state at the East Coast end, but there are parts along the 7 miles of East Coast Bypass Road that I guess are not quite complete, and we won't know that until I make the trip. There are parts of it that have been completed, and I don't know if you can actually drive all the way from Eccles to Ogle, but I know some cars are trying to do it. The reason why I know you can't do it now is because the traffic coming out of Ogle here is not dense enough to account for the amount of traffic that would bypass it, would be using the bypass route. So this part of it, they've started to put in the retaining wall. You can see the retaining walls have been built in this section. It's a Saturday morning and these guys are actually working overtime. This is a fairly wide, I don't know if the video is capturing this, but it's a fairly wide canal. It's about, I would say, it's about 20 feet or about 7 meters wide. So about 20 feet wide. And it does replace a much wider canal that was there before, because remember this was a very wide canal. They've had to fill in some of it to gain all of this real estate for the road to build these lanes, but they've managed to keep a fair amount of the width of the canal, 20 feet, and it's fairly deep. It's probably going to be a little deeper than it was in terms of capacity originally. Now, of course, these guys are probably Cuban or tell me something. You guys from Cuba or Venezuela? Cuba or Venezuela? Cuba. Okay. So a lot of these guys are Spanish speaking, but they're from Cuba. Some people are asking whether, in fact, the workers we were passing were from Venezuela. Some of them are, but most of these guys who are working on the canal system are from Cuba, as one of them just said, Cuba. Guyana and Cuba have a strong diplomatic relations, and Cubans have been able to work in Guyana, to travel to Guyana without visas, visa-free. And that has become an issue right now because the US government has changed its stance, is becoming a lot more closed, and have cracked down on Cuban migrants and migrants from all over the world, but particularly from Latin America and Cuba. And they have been starting to lean on Guyana and the Caribbean to expel Cuban nationals. But Guyana and the Caribbean are part of the CARICOM, and Cuba is now part of CARICOM, Caribbean community. Cuba is a Caribbean country and part of CARICOM, and so Guyana is obligated, because of its arrangements, its agreements with the CARICOM community, to have Cuban nationals working and traveling to Guyana. And we actually have to stand up to the changing American foreign policy, because you can't just abandon your allies just because America has changed its government. You know, CARICOM has to be a much more stable community than that. But this is what is happening here, guys. This is what the canal system here on the East Coast Bypass Road looks like. And this is what the canal system looks like here on the East Coast. You can see the retaining walls have been built in this section, and they're still working on the rest of the canal system. So a fairly large part of this East Coast Bypass Road still has to be completed. You can see straight ahead, that's the AC Marriott Hotel. AC Marriott Hotel is also close to completion, and further up the road, that white building is the new maternity hospital, and opposite maternity hospital, that is the ExxonMobil has their headquarters. But we are now approaching Ogle Airport. This is the Ogle. That's Ogle Airport, as seen from the new East Coast Bypass Road. It is a small airport, small regional airport. There are international flights, but not large, not for large aircrafts. This fence, this is the perimeter of the airport. That's airport property. A sign now that says airport property. Okay, this is actually quite new. That sign that says airport property is actually quite new. And the runway is straight ahead in that direction. It's the airport runway. And so traffic is allowed to use this part of the road, only because the airport needs to remain operational This road is not yet open for use. As you can see, this section now has asphalt. So from this point on, it seems as if they have managed to complete the road surface. They've laid down asphalt, but the road is by no means complete. As you can see, the median is still to be completed. They have put in the wires, electrical wires for street lights. So the street lights, I guess, have to be installed here in the median. And they've also put in the light poles, the lamp poles in the median, in parts of the median further up in the distance. So what is happening here at the East Coast Bypass Road? I would say it's further along now than it was the last time we were here. I'm not so sure. They actually filled in this canal all the way up to this point. So I'm assuming they're probably going to do the same. They're going to have to build a canal system, extend it all the way along this point, because they've actually filled in a fair amount of the canal with that sand, and they're actually going to have to dig it out again and put in the concrete canal to retain the catchment, the water catchment. They're probably going to have to do it on both sides too, because you can't just fill in all these canals in what used to be a floodplain for sugar cane. Hopefully somebody's paying attention to that, and that they will in fact reverse a lot of this filling in of the canals. But this is what is happening here in this neck of the woods. The East Coast Bypass Road is actually being built by the Indian contractors, and therefore you'll be able to compare eventually driving on the surface of this road with driving on Heroes Highway and on the coast to see who does it best, whether it be Chinese, the Indians, or the Guyanese. We know the Guyanese are building concussion roads, according to the US Secretary of State, and nobody would disagree with that, because local people have been complaining about that road surface for as long as it has existed. Since it opened about 2 or 3 years ago, people have complained that the surface is uneven, it's bumpy, it's rough. But of course, nobody listens. Like I said, whenever I talk about mediocrity, people on this channel, the government supporters, would always tell you about Burnham this and Granger that.